Dr. Rand McClain, thank you so much for coming on. And I know you and I have been working together. We've been talking through a whole bunch of fun stuff from hormones to peptides to anti-aging, but now it's time to bring it to my audience so that they can learn from your ingenious mind. You've been doing this for a long time. So I'm so excited to have your knowledge on my show. So thank you.
Well, I'm excited to be here. Thank you for such a great intro, very complimentary. Thank you for that. Not sure if even a fraction of that is worthy of me, but again, thank you. But I'd love to share with you whatever I've learned so far. Some of these anti-aging tools we were talking about earlier. Yeah, there's not a whole lot of science that we can gather because it involves some generations, and I've only been around for 60 years, but we're doing the best we can, right?
Well, and you don't look it. So for those listening and not watching, my God, I mean, this is the perfect example of a man who takes care of himself, who does not look his age. And we're going to kind of talk about what are those secrets to not looking your age. I'm huge into anti-aging, both for aesthetics and for longevity. And your book, Cheating Death, obviously you touch on that because it's not just about living longer in some nursing home. It's about living your best life as a huge badass feeling amazing.
Yeah, I have yet to meet anyone ever, and it's rare you can say that in medicine or just in life, where it's never or always, but never met anybody who said, "Yeah, I'd like to trade some off I'd like to trade quality for quantity." Never heard that. Actually, people sit in my office regularly and say, "Hey, doc, listen, let me shoot straight with you. If you can give me another 5 years of quality life, I'll take 10 off the back end. That's an easy trade for me." And the beauty of this, I say it all the time, is that you don't have to make that trade, and you don't have to necessarily trust in me. You just trust in your own natural, we call it common sense. If we're making your life better by preventing or reversing type 2 diabetes or coronary artery disease, don't you think that not only you'll live better, but probably live longer, because those morbidities tend to cut your life short anyway? So it's not a robbing Peter to pay Paul scenario. It's a win-win.
Right. Right. Exactly. And a lot of that, well, so first of all, actually, before we go into the secrets, I have never heard your story of how you came into this world of anti-aging medicine, because as we know, and many of my listeners know, going through that conventional medicine system, you're taught if this, then this, give this pill, call it a day. People are in and out in 5 to 7 minutes, check the box. What made you do that shift from conventional medicine and really open your mind and open your practice up to unconventional treatments, basically functional medicine?
Well, I always say it was more desperation than inspiration because of my own issues. I got into medicine late. I started the whole process when I was about 37 years old. I was a CPA for the longest time, and I tell people medicine was my ninth career. I got into Chinese medicine first, partly out of that desperation and frustration with what you call, the way you describe it. I call it paint by numbers medicine. Where you're just ticking boxes, and you can do it through an algorithm that somebody at really the insurance company has helped develop, because it's financially based rather than just medically based. So that's how I got started. I just said, what works? What do I need to do? And then I thought, well, if I'm doing this for myself, I've done the research, the deep dives, as we call it, and I've sought out the best practitioners of this sort of treatment. Why wouldn't I want to implement that in my own program to share with other people? It just kind of easy to see how that followed. But it does take some work and some faith, and that's part of the reason why I wrote the book. Because these days you go on the internet and you can dig up stuff. You can prove any case that you want to prove. You'll find a study somewhere that says what you want. And the problem is there's so many poorly done studies that you can do that. And it makes it so difficult to trust what's out there. So you go back to the standard, what you were referring to earlier, the 5 to 7, I call it 3 to 5 minute visit, where they just say, okay, here are the pills we have for that, and thank you, see you later, bye.
Right. because you have 20 other people that you need to see in the next hour.
I have actually had that said to my face. Actually, they said 30. But yeah, I had more questions and I was told, sorry, time's up. I've got 30 more patients after you.
Yep. Yep. It's unfortunate, but that is the case. But that is also why you do what you do. I do what I do. We want to help people and give them time and actually listen to them and listen to their problems and piece that puzzle together. And in order to piece that puzzle together, you need time with the patient.
And again, we can definitely lay blame on the system, the doctor, but part of my point I was trying to make, not very well, I think, but the patient, if they're involved and they can push this forward too, they're going to stop and say, no, that doesn't work for me. 5 to 7 minutes is not enough. I've done the research, or I am aware because I read a book, I read a peer-reviewed study that actually makes sense. Somebody I trust, we know is trustworthy, etc. I want an answer regarding this. Tell me why it doesn't work. And we were talking earlier. I'm not talking about Dr. Google type stuff you might read in, with all due deference, Time Magazine article, okay, where a reporter, not another physician, has reviewed it, the peer review process. I'm talking about real science. And anyway, this is the idea, part of the reason for the book and what you and I both do, which is to disseminate the information so that the other side of the equation, one that we wouldn't necessarily lay blame on, can take some responsibility. Be your own best advocate as a patient.
Mm-hmm. Yep, 100%. And then I'm always teaching people that, to be your best patient advocate and stand up for yourself, 100%. So as we're moving into the anti-aging talk, of course, we have to start with hormones, because hormones are the key to life. And a very, very interesting story to kind of lead into this. My husband and I were out and he was looking around. He's like, all these people, they're like kind of around our age, right? Everybody's like old. They all look like donuts. Like they're all just out of shape and old. I go, that's because we take hormones. Hormones are the key to life. And that alone helps us to not age like the typical American. So let's start off with the importance of hormones across the board, both sexes. And then I do want to get into my passion, your passion, testosterone, and its importance in anti-aging.
Well, hormones, as you say, are very important. And without them, we tend to not function as well. It's a horrible analogy, but one that most people understand. It's like, you can have the best, you can have a 12-cylinder race engine with the best petrol, 97 octane. But if you don't have the oil in the car, it's not gonna, the combustion is not gonna work out right. Put it that way. And the same thing with hormones. You can do everything else right, but if you don't have the leverage of testosterone, for example, for muscle mass, for energy, for that sense of well-being, then yeah, you're gonna not only look older, but you're gonna be older. You're gonna function not as well, just like a car without oil. And it's a matter of certainty now, not conjecture anymore. We know that, I believe it's still defined as age 35, you're going to experience either perimenopause for a female or paraandropause for a male. So this one's a no-brainer. At some point, depends upon the individual, not the, I always talk about that mythical average human being. 35 might be the number for a lot of people, but it might be 30. Especially for people under stress. It might be 45 for people that aren't under stress or chose their parents differently than you and I. Right. So that's not important, the age at which it occurs, but the fact that it's going to occur if you live long enough is important to know. So it is essential that you address the hormones. At some point you're going to need to. So the sooner the better. And I mean that, if you can get a bead on what is normal for you, even when you're healthy, it's always nice to have, so that you can rule it in or out if something's going on and you say, oh, but my hormones are the same as before. Maybe it's something else. Or no, my hormones have taken a precipitous fall. It makes it even more obvious. But yeah, I couldn't agree more. Hormones are, and we're not just talking about testosterone. Regulating hormones, whether it's excess estrogen for guys is important or not enough for gals. So it's not just all about testosterone, although I would argue, I always joke about, and I give my age away, the old Saturday Night Live commercial for Shimmer. It's a floor wax. No, it's a dessert topping. A lot of people, when they hear me, are probably thinking, Jesus, what do you think testosterone does everything in the world? No, but it does a heck of a lot. And it can be a game changer, as you and your husband know. And a lot of people that have, done the research and gotten on the program, so to speak.
Right. Exactly. No, it definitely, we need to mention estradiol and progesterone. You and I had talked earlier this week about the benefits of progesterone for men and when you use it as well. So all hormones are beneficial. I like to focus on testosterone because I think it's the one that gets the bad rap in both males and females. And because, as you know, so many people tie it back to bodybuilding. And I came from that world. And did I see the abuse? Absolutely. In both sexes? Yes, 100%. But when it's used properly and when it's used as an anti-aging treatment to actually address low testosterone in males and females, it can have a host of benefits outside of the aesthetics, outside of the muscle gain and the fat loss. So I really want to kind of get into, I talked about this at my talk at KetoCon, just all of the different things that can benefit, all the different systems and organs and disease states and conditions that can benefit from getting your testosterone to an optimal level.
Well, again, I think it's definitely the hormone where there's more bang for the buck, so to speak. Once you get into replacing it, yes, not just using it for aesthetics. Although you mentioned muscle mass, I mean, there's the aesthetic part of that, certainly, but we use, muscle mass, I argue, is synonymous with metabolism, if you think about it. Why do you have to eat so much food? It's not for your brain. I think your brain could probably survive on, well, more than half a pack of Lifesavers, but not too much. I'm sure you've never had somebody ring you up and say, boy, Amy, you should have showed up today. We went to the library and burned 3,000 calories studying Einstein for 4 hours. They've actually done studies showing that if you studied really, really hard in the library all day, you might increase your caloric output by maybe 300 calories. So that's not the answer. It's always something they're telling you about the missed workout you had that involved moving your muscles, right? So it's not just about aesthetics. And I've seen reversal of type 2 diabetes, insulin-dependent type 2 diabetes, just by putting muscle back on your frame. We call it a sugar sink. It's a place where it's clamoring, your muscle is, for glycogen to be refilled once you've worked out. And even if you are not working out, if you're carrying more muscle, you're literally burning more calories when you're sleeping. But when you're doing your average day-to-day stuff, going to the grocery store, walking the dogs, whatever it might be, you're burning more calories because you're carrying that metabolic liability, the muscle mass. And it's a game changer. And I can go on and on about, exercise being the great equalizer. But one thing that you mentioned earlier about the stigma attached to testosterone, I think a large part of that is we confuse anabolic steroids with steroids.
Right.
First of all, testosterone, estrogen, progesterone, they're all steroids, meaning made from cholesterol. And stop me if your audience already knows all this stuff from you by now. But anabolic steroids are not naturally occurring substances. They are steroids that have been adjusted so that they make for more muscle mass. They're anabolic. And they still do a lot of the same things that testosterone would do. So I think a lot of the stigma comes from the abuse of anabolic steroids more so than the naturally occurring testosterone, although people can abuse that too. It's just a lot harder to do so because it's hard to find negatives that come with testosterone use, certainly when compared to anabolic steroids. Now, the other part of this is testosterone gets a bad rap because of what testosterone can be converted into. Dihydrotestosterone, one of the metabolites, is what earns testosterone the bad rap. It's much more potent in terms of what we call the androgenic side effects, the things we don't want, like whether it's a guy or a girl, the extra hair on the chin or in the ears, or shoulders or wherever it is. And we forget men and women have hair in the same places. Women just tend to have a lot less of it, right? So It's going to accelerate that growth, and it comes with testosterone replacement if you don't govern the conversion. So I'll stop there. I just, a few things to clarify, because yeah, I wonder, and I don't think we'll ever know the reason why it's gotten such a bad rap over all these years. It's an essential hormone, and it does wonders when done properly.
When done properly. Exactly. And are you also seeing and I know there's literature on this as well, that tie into protection of the cardiovascular system and even neuroprotection, cognition, memory improvement, bone, hair. Are you seeing all of that as well in your practice?
Yeah, we've known there's a link between low testosterone and things like coronary artery disease, which I think you just mentioned,
Mm-hmm.
type 2 diabetes, which I mentioned earlier, colon cancer, prostate cancer. When we're talking about guys, right? That used to be linked. Oh boy, if you take testosterone, you're going to get prostate cancer. It's a given.
Right.
Now we actually have, albeit small studies, showing that use of testosterone can be not only protective, and there are larger studies to prove that, but used as a treatment for prostate cancer. They call it bipolar therapy, where they'll give you some testosterone treatment and they'll pull it away, give it to you. And they've had great success. I say great. I think the N was maybe 15 patients, but and it might have improved. They might have duplicated the study at a bigger scale by now. But anyway, testosterone, a shortage of it. The one thing I forgot to add was osteoporosis, which affects men and women.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, and the thing is, again, we've known this for a long time, and the neurocognitive benefit is coming to bear more. I argue it's more than anything, it's having more energy. It's when you're above, say, 80 or 90, then you can expect to have, and I'm dating myself again, some issues perhaps with the filament in the light bulb. I don't know if they still have filaments in light bulbs anymore, but before that, it's usually a lack of flow to the light bulb. The energy is not there, and you go, oh God, I got this brain fog. And then you get your energy back and you go, no, I don't have a brain fog. There's nothing wrong with my brain per se. I didn't have any energy to think. I was exhausted.
Yep, exactly. And even just mood too. So tying back into what you mentioned about the brain, mood, that whole grumpy old man syndrome, right? We say that jokingly, but men are getting older and they're getting grumpy because their testosterone drops, and that starts to affect energy and cognition and focus and mood. And so you become more depressed and lethargic, and you just stop giving a shit basically on a day-to-day basis, and you become grumpy.
Well, and just to be fair about it, so to speak, and to make the point, it's not just about guys. Women
Right.
get grumpy too. Women are absolutely dependent upon testosterone, is my point.
Yes.
And that's something that's finally coming into view. And you would think it would have been there, particularly for physicians who know that the physiology is the same, in the sense that testosterone and estrogen are both present in males and females, just different ratios, but the testosterone has the same effect on a female as it does a male. And yeah, without it, you can be grumpy and depressed. Testosterone is nature's antidepressant. They had a great study back in the 1950s, I believe, where they treated recalcitrant depression with testosterone. And the cool thing about the study back then was, this is where I'd shake my head and go, okay, what went wrong? Why didn't this carry forward to today? Why was there a long break with this stigma we were talking about? The study used women, not men,
Oh,
with
wow.
recalcitrant depression. And I think, and I'll be conservative since, presumably I am, because I used to be a CPA, but I think there was like at least an 85% resolution of symptoms using testosterone in women of, now the important thing was their age, and this is part and parcel of what happens. Excuse me. We we have something called the Bible of Psychiatry, the DSM-5, right?
Mhm.
We know that if depression is in your genes, so to speak, if you're destined to get it or you have a proclivity for it, it's going to occur in your late teens or early 20s. Well, when do most people have issues in this country? This has been studied. We have the amount of SSRIs or SNRIs that are prescribed usually happens somewhere in midlife,
Right.
not at 17, 18, 19 years old. Why is that? Well, things happen, right? That could be when you're, unfortunately, your parents die, or you get divorced, or you change jobs, or whatever the heck it is. legitimate reasons to be depressed. Better Living Through Science, we get on an SSRI for 6 months or 12 months, and then you should be able to get off it. But people are on it for 10, 20 years, and the joke is, well, what, you had a Prozac deficiency? No. You have, about that same age, though, a drop in testosterone, nature's own antidepressant. And I think that's where the link is, because again, even by our own standards in psychiatry, it makes no sense that you have all these people coming down with, lifetime depression at 35, 40 years old.
Right. Right. Exactly. I love that. I love that. I could talk about testosterone all day long. I really could, but I want to jet off into different topics too, and just really pick your brain. One thing that you said earlier, and I kind of want to go down that rabbit hole slightly, is about anabolic steroids. Now, what fascinates me, especially coming from the background that I come from, is that you now will use oxandrolone, i.e. Anavar, in your practice for a variety of different reasons. And that's what I want to talk about too. I find it fascinating because obviously that is a drug that, we'll call it the girly steroid, right? So back when I was competing, the girls took the Anavar because they didn't want to get the androgenic side effects. Now, obviously, if you take too much, you can still get the acne, you can still get some androgenic side effects from it. But it was kind of the girly steroid because it wouldn't make you huge, big, and bulky, but you would get the leanness and you would get the muscle retention and you would get the strength without growing a beard or a clitoris. So can you talk to me about how did oxandrolone come back into normal practice in practices like yours, where you do think outside the box? I've heard Peter Attia talk about it. Obviously, you guys are using it. So let's go down that rabbit hole slightly.
Well, and we're not alone. I mean, there's so many other guys that deserve more credit. I won't speak for Peter, but certainly more credit than I do. I mean, Dr. Lipschultz out of Baylor University is kind of the godfather of this medicine, or one of many. I'm not sure if Morgenthaler has clinical practice going or not, but or Dr. Shippen, I know he's semi-retired, if not fully retired, but there's others out there using anabolic steroids smartly. And I say that instead of just mentioning oxandrolone, better known as Anavar, since G.D. Searle started making it in 1962. No longer made as Anavar, but we all know it as such, right? But it just makes so much sense for cases, particularly like you said with women, where why not avoid the androgenic side effects if you can, right? And still, have someone that you can treat for an inability to put on the muscle mass despite doing all the right stuff. They're eating right, training right, sleeping right, and yet, they have issues keeping weight on. It's a no-brainer. And you've also got other patients, oftentimes with cachexia outright, because they're cancer patients that have been treated for estrogen-sensitive cancers. And one thing that needs mentioning, I think, so everyone knows with oxandrolone, is it will not convert to estrogen. And so if you have a female who, I'm thinking of one right off the top of my head, 73 years old, who was treated for breast cancer, estrogen sensitive, it's been 5 years, no recurrence. The oncologist finally signed off on it because there was some education that needed to be done. Because if you give anyone testosterone, the body can convert it to estrogen, and it's still contraindicated, when someone has had estrogen sensitive cancers. And we can go into a deeper hole, and I won't do it, but in essence, we haven't really caught on to the differences as much as we should within the estrogen family. And so we still just say, hey, no estrogen, period. Right. Well, oxandrolone solves the problem right then and there. You can keep the weight on them, put some weight back on, maybe even, some life-saving weight, and avoid the estrogen. Again, it's a no-brainer. And without the side effects, like you mentioned, it's a dihydrotestosterone derivative, which is the one that gets deservingly all the credit for the acne, the hair in the wrong places, but it's a derivative. But it doesn't work the same way as dihydrotestosterone. So again, they call it the female hormone for that reason, but it works great for guys too. And the studies show it also helps with fat reduction as well as muscle gain. And of course, that's advantageous too, because in our society, obviously in any industrialized society, there's a lot of fat people. So you get this nice little side benefit of working off some of the fat as well.
Right.
You're mentioning oxandrolone. I got to throw in there. It's not just about this one. I mean, I have a lot of HIV patients in my practice, and things like nandrolone used to go by the name of decadurobalin
Mhm.
are also not very energetic at all. But you need to put 20, 25 pounds of weight, preferably muscle, on a male, maybe 15 on a female who has HIV. It is literally a game changer, a lifesaver, literally a lifesaver, because to have that extra weight makes all the difference. So yeah, you can look at the, as a lot of people do, the sort of, I don't want to call it the bad side because I don't want to be judgmental, but as
Right.
a physician, not a bodybuilder or anybody in that field, it's not just about cosmetics. As a physician, we're helping someone live better, possibly even saving their life. These are things that they should be part of any medical practice as long as the physician knows what he or she's doing, obviously.
Right. And I love that. I love the thinking outside the box to truly customize a plan for that individual, for that patient, and to make it so that you're not, I guess, contained by certain thought processes to not use this or not use that because it was deemed bad or it was deemed an anabolic steroid. Well, it is an anabolic steroid, but like you said, using it in the proper way, not using it when you're 25 to step on stage and look your best, using it in a proper way to optimize your health.
Well, and speaking of age, if I might, and I think I put a little blurb in the book about this too, accidental, well, I think all falls are accidental unless you're a stuntman, right? But falls
Right.
are a major cause of death in the elderly, particularly. I think it's ranked number 4 still, but arguably it could be, jacked up to 3 or even 2 if you look at the fact that if a senior falls and doesn't die within 3 days of the hospital, but they die a month later from hospital-acquired pneumonia, for example, or wasting, and who knows, there's so many things that can happen very quickly when you're older like that.
Mm-hmm.
It doesn't count as dying from the fall. It counts as dying from hospital-acquired pneumonia. You follow me? So,
Yep.
really the accidental death, the fall caused the death, but it doesn't get treated that way. So I think it's a much bigger problem, is my point, than give it credit for. And again, it seems like a no-brainer. If you've got someone who's 80 years old, who's having difficulty getting around because they don't have the muscle and therefore something to activate for function, the strength that needed to even just walk to the bathroom and back, well, again, this is a no-brainer. Let's give them something to help them. It stimulates your appetite, gives you energy, puts that muscle back on the frame so they can get active again. And we all know that movement is part of the definition of life. If you look it up, most definitions of what life means includes the word movement.
Mm-hmm.
Then it radiates to all other aspects of their life. And again, I think this is something we're missing in medicine, as a great tool, simple tool. And these things have been around forever. I mean, we don't need any more studies regarding these chemicals, these
Right.
hormones, better way to put it, obviously.
I know. It's amazing. It's amazing. It just is. Yeah, 100%. So kind of moving in that same realm of things that people probably haven't heard of, but that are readily used, kind of I want to call it a new kid on the block, but maybe it isn't. Rapamycin. I've heard about it from actually even my plastic surgeons, like, are you using rapamycin? I'm like, no, I haven't gone down that rabbit hole of studying it yet. Because he knows, like, I'll use growth hormone, I'll use oxandrol, I'll use peptides, I'll use anything to anti-age. And I haven't dove into that yet. So I would love to pick your brain on it. We were talking a little bit off air. So let's give the folks kind of an overview. What is this rapamycin? How did it start? How did it come into the anti-aging world?
Well, rapamycin actually has been around for a long time, and it's part of that family. People have heard of a Z-Pak,
Hmm?
azithromycin, but it's used not as an antibiotic, but it's used as, the example commonly given is, you get a kidney transplant, and we use it for graft versus host disease to protect against it. It tamps down the immune system so your body doesn't reject the new kidneys. Now, that's used, well, it is used in a much higher dose in those circumstances and used regularly, like daily. What we've done now is study rapamycin and the latest and greatest protocols use it once a week at a much lower dose in order to, and this is all theoretical at this point, but tamp down enough on the immune system for a moment, okay, but not so much as to reduce immunity and therefore, be much more likely to get sick from anything.
Right.
But it's not activate, but it's also tamping down on something called mTOR.
Yes.
There's an mTOR complex 1 and mTOR complex 2, and I try and make, and I'm not going to do this here, I promise. I'll stop before I go into the weeds, but I try and do the best I can as a nerd, and with the help of a guy named Bruce, who does this for a living, helps translate nerd speak into stuff that makes sense to normal people, so that it's understandable. Because I think it's important to know, because as we were talking off air, we don't have the gold standard studies to say, oh yeah, this is a go for sure. We know it works for kidney transplant rejection, but we don't know it works for anti-aging. But the theory sounds really, really good, and it seems to work in animals. And you've got guys out there who are leaders in the field. You mentioned Peter Attia. They're taking it, and he's a great one to mention too, because he's what I call a red team captain. He's the guy that will poke a hole into anything. He's not blue team, and I'm not saying he's not an optimistic guy, but he's really good at finding holes in arguments, and yet he's taking it. He admits. Mm-hmm. That's got to tell you something. We could all be wrong, but right. It sounds like a really good way of instituting something that we have in the system naturally. When you antagonize that mTOR complex 1, you set into motion things that the body uses to repair itself. And that's about as general as I can keep it, right? Without getting into some of the details. People, though, I'm sure your audience has heard of autophagy, so it can signal that process, which is necessary. It's not all about, I use the example of a cell that's it's a kitchen, right? It's manufacturing different folded proteins and messengers to other cells, messenger RNA. Everyone knows about that now with COVID and the vaccines. But if that's all you did without stopping to clean up the mess in the kitchen from cooking, whether it's cleaning the pans or the tomato sauce, I use the example that drips onto the recipe book, and now is that a 3 or an 8 ounce, helping or whatever, things get messed up. So the body has this great innate mechanism of cleaning up the kitchen so things can keep running smoothly. And when you're running too fast, not getting enough sleep, for example, not eating right, then this system doesn't work very well. And mTORC1 antagonism activates these genes called sirtuin genes too. They're all interconnected, I should say.
Yep.
And the bottom line is, it's useful to understand that we need both. And this is the part that we find doesn't get enough attention, and this is one way to activate it. That's kind of nutshelling it without getting into the weeds.
No, I don't mind the weeds, honestly, because sirtuin, so we know those are, I don't even know how to break that down even. That's what we focus on when we're looking at biological versus chronological age and telomeres and its tie into anti-aging. So if we can activate that sirtuin pathway, we can essentially reverse our biological age, correct? Am I saying that right?
Well, yeah, I mean, it looks like we can actually reverse it. We can certainly slow, stop, or even reverse that process of, now we have to get into how you define aging.
A little bit, yeah.
The process of going the wrong direction. How's that, right? Where you're creating stuff, to use the kitchen analogy, that's contaminated from yesterday's or the weeks before unclean pan, right? So you're going to not function properly, which is one very broad way of defining aging, right? If you don't activate these innate systems within the body. So yeah, that's a great way of looking at it. And there's other things like exercise, and again, I don't want to go too far afield, but since we're talking about activating these systems, a lot of this occurs naturally in sleep if we get the proper amount of sleep. But some of this can be activated through exercise. One of the, people talk about NAD plus. The best way to activate, to increase NAD plus is to exercise. If you flash back to your high school physiology, that transport from NADH to NAD, bingo, you just did it when you exercised. And that can activate the sirtuin genes. That NAD is necessary anyway for the sirtuin genes to be activated. Let's see, I don't want to get too far afield here, but fasting is another way to do that. We know now.
Right.
I don't know about you, but I am not into missing any meals, so I'll just increase the exercise output rather than missing meals. But there are all kinds of options to do this. And again, rapamycin is another way of helping the system help itself.
Yeah. No, I love that. All these little tools that we are now finding, especially in the functional world, the biohacking world, the anti-aging world, I think are going to be those secret weapons as we age to stave off disease, to live longer, better. And it's all those little nuggets, just even, kind of moving into peptides, all the different peptides that are out there. And now the average person knows what a peptide is, where, 3-5 years ago, they're like, what is that? You mean a collagen peptide? Like, now we know that there are certain peptides that can be used for repair and recovery and post-surgery and growth hormone release and decreasing inflammation and brain protection. And we get into this whole new world of anti-aging tools. So I just find it fascinating. That's why I like getting in the weeds a little bit, just a little bit. So
well, peptides are one of my favorites because, and I devoted an entire chapter in the book and you can devote more. There's so many things you can do with a peptide. I use the analogy of a tinker toy, where you've got this hub in which you can introduce all these spokes that can connect to other hubs and create just about any structure you want. And depending upon the structure, it's going to affect the cell differently. And people actually know about peptides. They just don't know it. Insulin's been around for a long time. Artificially produced insulin, that's a peptide.
Right.
But the peptides that are coming to the fore recently are much more, I don't want to say more useful than insulin, because insulin is essential, but broader in scope as to what we can do with them. Obviously, we have GH secretagogues, we call them, things that can tell your body to make more GH. You mentioned all the other ones, like there's BPC 157, which we believe helps with ligaments and tendons, can also help with the GI tract. That's really its original purpose.
Yep.
There are things that can improve cognition, cerebrolysine or Cimax, Solanc. There's so many options to choose from, and yet we're just scratching the surface. And that's where you can tie it in with AI, which is another part of the book, because it is so important to realize that to get to those structures, like with the Tinker Toy example, the most efficient way is to use artificial intelligence to come up with the structures rather than hit or missing them in a lab somewhere going, well, what should we try today? Let's just throw a spoke on this one. No, this will give you, based upon feedback that goes beyond what any one human can do. This gives you ideas. Hey, this is more likely to, for example, be another aid to have your body produce its own growth hormone. So let's try this one first. So, it's very exciting to me, peptides, because of what we can do with them and how quickly we should be able to develop them in the next decade.
Definitely. Yeah, no. And they're simple amino acid structures. Like you said, insulin's been around forever. So taking something so simple and building upon it and seeing how it's reacting in the body and the benefits that the body can obtain from it. It's just, I truly believe that we are going to see all of these things that you and I talked about today, from hormones to those secret weapons to peptides. That's going to be the new forefront. Now, whether conventional medicine accepts that or not, we could go down the whole big pharma rabbit hole. Oh my God. But in our world, I think that that's going to be the new wave of treatment, of medicine per se, because we can reverse disease with safe protocols.
The horse is out of the barn.
Yeah.
You can't put this stuff back. With the internet being what it is today, there's no keeping it a secret. There's no bearing the facts. And I'll knock on wood because maybe they'll find a way, whoever they is. The pharmaceutical groups are either gonna, pick it up or be left behind, if that's a true consideration, which I think it is. I think it's in their best interest to start developing these things like they did longer acting forms of insulin, for example, and to start experimenting the way we do with, properly the way we do with all drugs, which a peptide could be considered one of, because otherwise they're going to be left behind. This is part of the future of medicine. There's no doubt about it. And, it'll just be a matter of how we get to these things, whether it's through an HMO, which is, I know it's a fine point, but it's a point nevertheless, because, there's certain people that this is the only access they have. The only possible access they have is through an HMO, for example. And if the HMO is not dealing with it, well, then that person is not completely out of luck, but it's going to make it a lot harder for them to obtain it, not just financially, but for other reasons too. Just
Right.
knowing about it, which again is part of the purpose of the book, so we can get this wave going where we wash through, we override, some of the limitations that the current medical system provides, or provides the wrong word. That the current medical system hinders us in a lot of ways because of the structure and the basis on which, basically money drives it. And I'm not against capitalism. I'm just observing the way it works or doesn't work. So again, to your point, yeah, I believe it's here to stay. What we call it and how it folds into the system for all of us as Americans or worldwide remains to be seen.
Right. Yep. I would agree. It'll be an interesting journey to see how it does unfold. So, Rand, before I let you go, I do want to pick your brain. I want you to give the audience of all the different things that we've talked about, from the more complex to the simple, like you mentioned, with sleep and exercise. What would be those, like, your top 3 tips to people who want to extend their longevity but age well? Do the whole anti-aging as you and I define it, not just living longer, but living longer better. What would be your top 3 tips?
Well, I hope this doesn't fall on deaf ears or come off as too anticlimactic, but it's, again, part of the reason I wrote the book, because if you want to give me 3 basic pillars for health span, healthy longevity, it's the basics, the same thing as great grandma told you. But what I try and do in the book is to explain the science behind it. So you're not just going, okay, well, great grandma told me that.
Right.
What else you got? Give me the peptides and et cetera. But the peptides and the et cetera are all fine tuning mechanisms for the 3 basics, arguably 4, because human to human contact is very important as humans, for most humans. But sleep, exercise, and nutrition are still the most important things.
Yeah.
A lot of misunderstanding amongst those things, those 3 things. With nutrition, the epidemiological studies are very misleading. They're poorly done. And you see it out there. This study says broccoli is good for you. This study says broccoli is bad for you. Well, which is right? And people just throw up their hands and say, I don't know. And I understand for some good reason there. It can send you down the wrong path. And I can see how it'd be very frustrating. But the point should be made there, one size does not fit all. And you can start with some diet that, doesn't have to be the latest fad, but, has a structure to it, and then decide, okay, how did that work for me and my goals? Tweak it or try something else, because everybody's going to be different. And what works for you could be 100% different than what works for somebody else. Sleep, there's been a lot of confusion around sleep. In the 80s, when I was going through, practicing as a CPA, we used to boast about how little sleep we got. Well, I got up at 3 this morning and started working. I got all this done, and I only slept 4 hours. Oh yeah, well, I slept 3 hours last night. That's what I do every week. And now we realize, and all the champion CEOs will boast about how much sleep they do get. 7 to 9 hours, we know, based upon some really good science, is essential. And again, it might be 7 that hits the spot for you. I might need 8.5, and it might vary time of year, my age, what I'm doing, that day, that week, the stress I'm under. But we know, unless you have a very rare gene mutation, 7 to 9 is where it goes with sleep. And then exercise. I mean, again, one size does not fit all. We know a lot about exercise and the different types. We definitely have an association between muscle mass, muscle strength, and VO2 max and health span. I mean, that's established. It's a given. So you need to adapt your exercise program to you and trying to maximize those things. And there's a very clear benefit between something as simple as just getting off the couch, for 20 minutes, getting into that top half versus the bottom half of people can confer so much benefit. You don't have to be an elite athlete. You don't have to be in the top 5%. As a matter of fact, there are not only diminishing returns at some point, but the concept of hormesis comes into play here, arguably in many years, not most things. Too much can actually be a bad thing. If you're an ultra endurance athlete, you can overdo it and that can actually hurt you.
Oh yeah.
But I try and present some of this stuff so that people realize it's not just about what your ancestors said. There are very good reasons to it that have nothing to do with folklore, legend, wives' tales, because it really is the gross knob that has to be adjusted first before we start fine-tuning it with things like the peptides, rapamycin. We haven't mentioned metformin, but that's another one that seems to show some promise. Other drugs that can lower blood sugar and activate something called AMPK, which can further this natural process of cleaning up the mess so we can get up and do it again tomorrow much more effectively. So, yeah, I mean, it's exciting. I would say and I hate to include you in this group, but for us nerds, I know
Yeah.
nerd is not necessarily a compliment.
Great. It's definitely a compliment.
It's nice to have these things that we can glom onto and utilize if we're interested. But for people who say, look, I rapamycin, I'm not going to do that. That sounds too much. Well, there's hope because you don't have to go into the fine tuning. Start with the basics, which I know you and I have to emphasize every single day, but hopefully a better understanding of the science behind it will get people more compliant with it.
I love that you brought it back to the basics, and everyone seriously needs to read your book, Cheating Death, because I'm glad you brought it back to the basics and said just what you just said, because you and I can also create monsters with our patients in that we do look at the et ceteras and we do think outside the box. And sometimes we can get the ones that come back and go, I just need more of, give me more hormones, more thyroid, more peptides. It's like, wait a minute. Are you sleeping? Are you exercising? Are you lifting heavy? Are you all stressed out? And are you eating like crap? And just what you said, those 3 basics, we have to come back to quite often with people and remind them that that's the core. That's the foundation. All this other stuff on top can be tweaked, but if you don't have the foundation, the house is crumbling. So,
well, Amy, you're not necessarily part of this group, but you were part of the bodybuilding world. How many times have you seen a patient come to you with their jug of distilled water, their cooler full of their foods for the rest of the day, and they'll tell you that they're taking this, that, and the other for muscle anabolism, and they go, Doc, you got to help me. I don't know why, but I'm stuck at this body composition. I can't put on any more muscle, and I can't lose fat. And then you go, well, what do you do for work? Oh, I'm up all night, packing for UPS. And then you go, well, so how much sleep are you getting? Well, I sleep during the day when I get home. But I've got and I'm not making excuses and I'm not, badgering anybody either. But they've got 2.3 kids and a mortgage. So they actually have a second job and they have kids. So they say, yeah, but I get 5 hours when I get home after work, That's a perfect example of all the fine tuning done to perfection for a lot of these people. I mean, again, you've been in the world. A lot of these guys and gals are OCD about that kind of stuff. But when it comes to the basics, you go, yeah, well, no wonder you're not growing. No wonder you're getting fatter. You're not doing the sleep. Come on.
Mm-hmm.
You see it all the time, right?
All the time. All the time. So I'm so happy you wrapped it up with that. That's perfect. That's perfect. It's perfect period at the end of the sentence. So Dr. Rand, thank you so much for joining me and for giving us all of your wisdom and fantastic conversation. We'll put the links in the show notes so people can grab your book. I think it's going to be a must read because just like you said, you take the basics, you take the et ceteras, and you break it down with science and the reasoning behind it. So I absolutely love it, highly recommend it, and thank you for your time.
Well, thank you for the time. I hope that your audience enjoys the conversation we had, and if they want more details, of course, that's why the book is there. But this is part and parcel of what you and I are both trying to do, which is disseminate the information so that patients can make the best decisions for themselves.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Doc.